For decades, Princess Anne was the monarchy's most disciplined guardian of silence. She protected secrets, upheld traditions, and never betrayed the crown's unspoken rules. But on one quiet morning, behind the sealed doors of a royal residence, Anne made a decision that would fracture loyalties and expose a truth buried deeper than anyone imagined. Because hidden inside the Queen Mother's private safe was something no one was ever supposed to see. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. And perhaps that was the most unsettling part of all, not the existence of the safe, but the fact that Princess Anne, of all people, had chosen to open the door to a secret that had remained untouched for decades. Princess Anne had built her entire life around discipline. She was not the royal who sought attention, nor the one who thrived in public adoration. She was something far more dangerous to secrets. She was observant, unwavering, and fiercely loyal to truth, even when truth threatened to wound the very institution she had spent her life protecting. For years, she had served as the monarchy's quiet enforcer, the one who ensured continuity when others faltered, the one who carried burdens without ever revealing their weight. But loyalty, she had come to realize, was not the same as blindness. And over the past several months, subtle inconsistencies had begun to whisper their way into her consciousness. It began with small things, discrepancies buried deep within inheritance registries, references to assets that had no recorded transfers, mentions of private instructions that had never been formally executed. At first, Anne dismissed them as administrative oversights. The monarchy, after all, was built on centuries of layered bureaucracy, where confusion could easily disguise itself as normality. But the deeper she looked, the clearer the pattern became. These were not accidents. These were absences, intentional omissions, pieces of a puzzle that someone had deliberately removed from public record. And every missing piece seemed to trace back to one person, the Queen Mother. Anne had known her not just as a monarch, but as a mentor. Their relationship had been built not on constant affection, but on something far more powerful: mutual recognition. The Queen Mother had seen in Anne a strength that required no validation, a steadiness that did not waver under pressure. There had been private conversations, quiet moments where words were few, but understanding was absolute. And yet, even in those moments, there had always been a sense that the Queen Mother was holding something back, not out of distrust, but out of timing. When Anne began quietly raising questions, she was met not with answers, but with resistance. Senior administrators, figures who had served loyally for decades, urged her to let it go. They spoke carefully, respectfully, but firmly. Some things are better left undisturbed, one of them had told her. Another warned that reopening old matters could create confusion where none needed to exist. Their words were calm, but their unease was unmistakable. They were not protecting Anne, they were protecting something else. That was when Anne understood. This wasn't about preserving order, this was about preserving silence. The realization settled heavily on her shoulders. Because if there was one thing Anne understood better than anyone, it was the difference between loyalty and concealment. Loyalty served the crown, concealment served fear, and Anne had never been someone who allowed fear to dictate her actions. Still, the emotional cost of what she was about to do weighed heavily on her. She knew that uncovering the truth might not strengthen the monarchy, it might fracture it, it might expose decisions that could not be undone. But she also knew something else. The Queen Mother had never acted without purpose. The confirmation came quietly, not through confession, not through announcement, but through discovery. A reference buried within a private document, a location mentioned only once and never again. A safe, hidden, unregistered, untouched. A safe that had never been acknowledged publicly, never included in official inventories, never spoken of beyond whispers too faint to be traced. In that moment, Anne felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Not fear, not doubt, but inevitability, because she understood, with chilling clarity, that whatever lay inside that safe had been meant to remain hidden until someone strong enough and loyal enough chose to uncover it. And Princess Anne had just made that choice. What Anne didn't yet realize was that the safe itself was only the beginning, and what lay inside would rewrite not just inheritance, but the future of royal power itself. The Queen Mother was known for her charm, her warmth, and her carefully crafted public image. But behind that elegance was a mind that planned decades ahead. Hidden within her private residence was a safe so secretive that even her closest advisors were unaware of its existence. And when Princess Anne discovered where it was concealed, one chilling realization emerged immediately. This safe wasn't created to protect wealth. It was created to protect a decision. And as that realization settled into Anne's mind, she began to understand something even more unsettling. This was not simply a forgotten object. This was a message left behind, waiting patiently for the right moment and the right person to uncover it. The Queen Mother had always understood timing. She understood patience in a way few others did. She never rushed, never revealed more than necessary, and never allowed her true intentions to be fully visible. That was what made this discovery so disturbing, because this safe had not been placed in a vault nor in any official archive. It had been concealed within a private chamber connected directly to her personal quarters, a space so rarely accessed that even senior household staff rarely entered it. This was not coincidence. This was deliberate isolation. It ensured that whatever the safe contained would remain untouched, not just by accident but by design. Anne's discovery hadn't come through chance alone. It had come through persistence, through questions others were too uncomfortable to ask. And when she quietly revisited old maintenance records, she noticed something that made her pause. There was a structural modification logged decades earlier, authorized personally by the Queen Mother herself. No explanation, no recorded purpose, just approval. It was subtle, almost invisible within the paperwork, but Anne understood its significance immediately. The Queen Mother had ensured the installation herself bypass in traditional channels, leaving no trace beyond a single administrative footprint. What made it even more unsettling were the whispers that surfaced once Anne began asking the right questions. Long-retired staff members, individuals who had once served with unwavering loyalty, recalled fragments of memory they had long dismissed. One remembered the Queen Mother personally supervising work in that private chamber, refusing assistance, insisting on privacy. Another recalled being instructed never to mention the modification to anyone, not even senior officials. At the time, it had seemed like routine royal discretion. But now, in the light of Anne's discovery, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like preparation, and perhaps the most haunting detail of all was the realization that no one, not Charles, not William, not any royal executor, had ever referenced the safe after the Queen Mother's passing, which meant one thing. It had not been opened, not during the transition of power, not during estate reviews, not during any formal inheritance process. It had remained sealed, exactly as she had left it, carrying intentions that had never been fulfilled. Anne could feel the weight of that truth pressing down on her. Because this wasn't simply about hidden wealth or forgotten property. This was about authority, about influence, about a choice that had been intentionally shielded from the natural flow of royal succession. And Anne understood the implications immediately. If the Queen Mother had hidden something this carefully, it wasn't because she doubted the system. It was because she doubted the people within it. That realization brought with it a quiet sense of dread, because Anne knew that opening the safe would not simply answer questions. It would create new ones. It would expose decisions that could not be undone, intentions that had never been challenged, unearned truths that had been buried beneath decades of carefully maintained silence. The safe was no longer just an object. It was a symbol, a final act of control from a woman who had understood power better than anyone else. A silent declaration that her will would not be dictated by expectation, but by conviction. And now, standing on the edge of that discovery, Anne understood that she was no longer simply uncovering the past. She was stepping directly into the Queen Mother's final plan. But as Anne prepared to open the safe, she had no way of knowing that the truth inside would not elevate the expected heirs, but instead point to someone almost no one anticipated. The room was silent. Every second stretched longer than the last as Princess Anne turned the final mechanism. For decades, this safe had remained untouched, a time capsule of the Queen Mother's most guarded intentions. But the moment the door slowly opened, Anne froze, because staring back at her wasn't just a collection of documents, it was a carefully assembled blueprint for the future of the monarchy, one that excluded names everyone assumed would be there. And in that instant, Anne felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, not fear, not confusion, but the unmistakable weight of revelation. Her breath slowed, not from uncertainty, but from recognition. This was not chaos, this was precision. The contents had been arranged with deliberate care, each document positioned not randomly, but purposefully. There were sealed envelopes bearing the Queen Mother's unmistakable handwriting, firm and steady, untouched by hesitation. Each one carried annotations, subtle but unmistakable, guiding the reader toward understanding without offering comfort. Anne immediately understood that this safe had never been meant for casual discovery. It had been prepared for a moment of consequence. For a moment when, say, Omone strong enough would be forced to confront what had been left behind. Her hands did not tremble, but her certainty did, because the deeper she looked, the clearer the truth became. This was not simply an inheritance in the traditional sense. This was something far more dangerous, strategic inheritance, not focused on preserving wealth, but on preserving control. The Queen Mother had not been distributing possessions. She had been assigning responsibility. She had been shaping the future long after her own voice had fallen silent. Anne's mind raced through the implications. Every assumption she had carried for decades now stood on fragile ground. She had believed she understood the Queen Mother's intentions. She had believed that succession, influence and authority would follow predictable lines. But what lay inside this safe dismantled that belief completely. The Queen Mother had not trusted predictability. She had trusted judgment. Her own judgment. There were instructions clear, direct, and undeniably personal. Not addressed to institutions, not addressed to committees, addressed to individuals, carefully chosen individuals. And yet, even before Anne allowed herself to fully absorb the meaning, she noticed something else, something even more disturbing. Certain names were missing, not erased, not crossed out, simply absent. The names that tradition had conditioned everyone to expect were nowhere to be found. Anne felt a quiet devastation settle within her, not because she felt betrayed, but because she realized how much had been misunderstood. The Queen Mother had carried this decision alone. She had entrusted no one with its execution. She had allowed the illusion of certainty to persist, knowing that the truth would only reveal itself when the time was right. And now, that time had arrived. Anne hesitated, not because she feared the truth, but because she understood its permanence. Once revealed, this decision could not be undone. It would ripple through the monarchy, altering relationships, reshaping loyalties, and exposing the Queen Mother's final act of authority. Anne had spent her life protecting the crown, but now she faced a different responsibility: protecting the truth. Her eyes moved slowly across the documents, absorbing each detail, each instruction, each silent declaration of intent. And then she saw it. A name, written clearly, repeated deliberately. Not hidden, not disguised. Asserted. Anne stopped. She read it again, hoping perhaps she had misunderstood, but the name remained, unshaken by doubt. And in that moment, Anne understood the full magnitude of what the Queen Mother had done. This was not oversight, this was choice, a choice that would shock everyone, a choice that would redefine loyalty, power, and legacy. Anne closed her eyes briefly, not in denial, but in acceptance, because she now carried knowledge that would change everything. Knowledge that would challenge expectations, confront assumptions, and expose the Queen Mother's final and most controversial decision. Because the name written across those documents wasn't Charles, it wasn't William, it wasn't anyone the world expected. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The Queen Mother's handwriting was unmistakable. Again and again, across multiple documents, one name appeared with absolute clarity: Sophie. Not as a beneficiary among many, not as a shared heir, but as the exclusive recipient. And in that moment, Princess Anne realized something that sent chills through her entire body. The Queen Mother hadn't simply favored Sophie, she had entrusted her with everything. And with that realization came a wave of understanding so powerful, so emotionally destabilizing, that Anne could feel the very foundation of royal expectation, she fitting beneath her. Sophie had never been the obvious choice. She had never commanded the spotlight with aggressive authority, never asserted dominance within royal hierarchy, and never positioned herself as someone destined to inherit influence beyond her assigned role. For years, she had existed within the monarchy as a quiet, constant, reliable, composed, and unshakably loyal. She fulfilled her duties without spectacle, without manipulation, and without the subtle hunger for power that Anne had come to recognize in others. Sophie did not chase importance, and perhaps that was exactly why importance had been given to her. Anne's mind raced backward through decades of quiet interactions, moments that once seemed insignificant, but now felt like deliberate evaluation. The Queen Mother had watched Sophie carefully, not openly, not in ways that drew attention, but through observation that required no acknowledgement. There were private conversations, brief but meaningful exchanges, moments where the Queen Mother had asked questions that, at the time, seemed casual. But now, Anne understood. They had never been casual. They had been assessments, tests of character disguised as ordinary conversation. Inside the safe, Anne found letters, personal, intimate, and unmistakably sincere. They were not written with the cold language of royal obligation. They were written with conviction. The Queen Mother spoke of Sophie's steadiness, her restraint, her ability to carry responsibility without allowing it to consume her. She described Sophie as someone who understood the burden of service, not as a privilege, but as a duty, someone who would protect legacy without being corrupted by it. And then came the most devastating realization of all. The word everything did not simply refer to financial inheritance. It referred to authority, to legacy, to influence that extended far beyond wealth. The Queen Mother had not merely passed down possessions, she had passed down trust. She had placed the future weight of her personal legacy into Sophie's hands, bypassing those who had always assumed they would inherit such responsibility by right of birth. Anne felt the emotional gravity of that decision settle deep within her, because she knew what this meant. This was not just unexpected, it was revolutionary. It would challenge assumptions that had governed the monarchy for generations. It would create questions that could not be easily answered, and it would force those who believed themselves entitled to influence to confront a truth they would struggle to accept. But perhaps the most haunting question was not what the Queen Mother had done, but why she had done it in secret. Why hide such a monumental decision? Why conceal it even from those closest to her? The answer lingered within the tone of the letters themselves. The Queen Mother had not hidden this decision out of fear. She had hidden it out of certainty. She had understood that timing mattered. That revelation too early would invite resistance, manipulation, and interference. By concealing her intentions, she had protected them, preserved them, ensured that when the truth finally emerged, it would do so beyond the reach of those who might have tried to alter it. Anne felt both awe and sorrow. Awe at the Queen Mother's foresight, sorrow at the isolation she must have endured carrying such a decision alone. Because this was not simply an act of inheritance, it was an act of defiance. A declaration that loyalty, integrity, and quiet strength mattered more than expectation or tradition. And as Anne continued reading, absorbing each carefully chosen word, she understood something even more unsettling. This was not simply about elevating Sophie. This was about bypassing everyone else. But the deeper Anne looked into the safe, the more disturbing the truth became, because the Queen Mother hadn't simply chosen Sophie. She had chosen her over everyone else. The documents weren't impulsive decisions. They were precise, deliberate. Calculated years in advance. The Queen Mother had foreseen a future filled with instability, shifting loyalties, and dangerous ambition. And in her private writings, she explained exactly why Sophie was chosen. It wasn't about affection. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about survival. Because the Queen Mother believed only one person could protect what she built, and it wasn't who anyone expected. And as Princess Anne began reading those words, she realized this was not simply an explanation. It was a warning. The Queen Mother had seen something others refused to acknowledge. Beneath the pageantry, beneath the unity presented to the public, she had sensed fractures forming within the monarchy's foundation. Her writings spoke of vulnerability not in structure, but in human nature. She described the growing presence of ambition that did not serve duty, but self-preservation. She wrote of individuals who wore loyalty publicly, but carried private motivations that could one day destabilize everything the crown represented. Her words were not emotional, they were measured, calm, and that calmness made them far more disturbing. Anne could feel the Queen Mother's clarity in every sentence. She had not acted out of fear, but out of foresight. She had understood that succession alone did not guarantee protection. Bloodline did not guarantee loyalty. Position did not guarantee strength. What mattered was character. What mattered was restraint. And in Sophie, she had found both. The Queen Mother described Sophie in terms rarely used within royal documentation. She spoke of emotional discipline, of quiet resilience, of someone who could endure pressure without becoming hardened by it. Someone who understood the weight of responsibility without allowing it to corrupt her judgment. Sophie, in the Queen Mother's eyes, was not simply trustworthy. She was incorruptible, not because she lacked influence, but because she had never sought it for its own sake. Anne paused, absorbing the magnitude of that belief. Because this decision had not been made lightly. It had been observed, evaluated, and ultimately confirmed over years of quiet scrutiny. The Queen Mother had watched Sophie closely, measuring not her public image, but her private consistency. How she responded to adversity, how she carried herself when no one was watching, how she maintained dignity even when overlooked. Perhaps most unsettling of all was the Queen Mother's admission that this decision had to remain hidden, not just from the public, but from the royal family itself. She wrote openly about the danger of premature revelation. She feared that if her intentions became known too soon, they would be challenged, questioned, and possibly undermined, not out of malice, but out of expectation. Tradition had its own momentum, and momentum could crush even the most carefully planned intentions. So she had protected it, preserved it in silence. Anne began to understand that this was not simply about giving Sophie authority, it was about protecting the monarchy from forces the Queen Mother believed would emerge in time. She had chosen someone underestimated precisely because underestimation offered protection. It allowed Sophie to remain untouched by rivalry, untouched by suspicion, untouched by the subtle corrosion that power often invited. The brilliance of it was undeniable. By placing her trust in someone outside the predictable chain of influence, the Queen Mother had ensured that her legacy would not be shaped by entitlement, but by integrity. She had bypassed expectation entirely, creating a safeguard hidden in plain sight. Anne felt a deep, complex mixture of admiration and unease. Admiration for the Queen Mother's clarity, unease at the implications of what she had done, because this decision did not simply elevate Sophie, it exposed vulnerabilities within the royal family itself. Vulnerabilities the Queen Mother had seen long before anyone else, and now Anne carried that knowledge alone. She understood the weight of it, the danger of it, the irreversible consequences that would follow once the truth emerged. Because this was not just about inheritance, it was about judgment, it was about trust, and most of all, it was about revealing a decision that had quietly redefined the monarchy's future long before anyone realized it. But as Anne absorbed the Queen Mother's reasoning, one terrifying question emerged: how would the rest of the royal family react when they discovered the truth? Secrets have weight, and once revealed, they don't just disappear, they explode. When Princess Anne began quietly informing select members of the royal inner circle, the reactions were immediate, emotional, and deeply divided. Because this wasn't just about inheritance, it was about power, it was about trust. And most of all, it was about the terrifying realization that the Queen Mother had made a decision that bypassed the very people expected to inherit everything. And in that moment, Anne understood she was no longer simply uncovering history, she was detonating it. She did not announce it publicly. She did not summon a formal assembly. That was never her way. Instead, Anne chose her words carefully, revealing the truth only to those whose positions made ignorance impossible. The first reactions were not loud. They were quiet, too quiet, silence that did not signal peace, but shock. Disbelief settled heavily in the room, not because the Queen Mother's authority was questioned, but because her intentions had been hidden so completely. For those who had lived their lives assuming proximity to legacy, guaranteed ownership of it, the revelation was destabilizing. There were questions, but not all of them were spoken aloud. Some existed only in expression, in pauses that lasted too long, in breaths drawn slowly, as if the weight of the truth made even breathing more difficult. Anne watched carefully, saying only what was necessary, offering no interpretation beyond what the documents made undeniable. She did not accuse. She did not defend. She delivered the truth exactly as it had been left behind, and that truth did not comfort anyone. For some, the reaction was deeply personal, not anger at Sophie herself, but at the realization that the Queen Mother had looked beyond them, that she had seen something they themselves had not recognized, or perhaps had refused to acknowledge. Years of assumption dissolved in an instant. The quiet confidence of inheritance, built not on confirmation but on expectation, suddenly had no foundation, and in its place came uncertainty. Others reacted differently. Their concern was not emotional, but strategic. They understood immediately what this meant beyond personal disappointment. This decision, if revealed publicly, would alter perceptions of royal continuity. It would invite questions about authority, about judgment, about decisions made outside established channels. Palace officials began speaking in careful, measured tones, discussing containment rather than confrontation. Not because they could undo the Queen Mother's decision, but because they feared the consequences of its exposure. Anne could feel the tension growing, not explosive, but dangerous in its restraint. This was not conflict expressed openly. It was conflict held tightly beneath composure, where it could not yet be challenged but could never again be ignored. She understood her role in that moment more clearly than ever before. She was not simply a witness, she was the messenger, the one entrusted, whether by fate or by design, to reveal what had been concealed. And yet, even as she fulfilled that responsibility, Anne carried her own emotional burden. She had loved the Queen Mother, trusted her, believed in her judgment, and now she was forced to confront the magnitude of the Queen Mother's final act, not as a granddaughter, but as its interpreter. She did not resent Sophie. She did not question the Queen Mother's reasoning, but she understood with painful clarity that this truth would not strengthen unity, it would test it, because the monarchy, for all its strength, depended not just on tradition, but on belief. Belief in continuity, belief in fairness, belief in the invisible structure that held everything together. And now, that structure had shifted. The most dangerous part was not the decision itself. It was the reaction it would provoke, once it moved beyond private knowledge and into public awareness. Because once the truth existed beyond controlled circles, it could not be guided, it could not be softened, it would exist on its own terms. Anne knew that moment was coming. But the most emotional reaction had yet to come, because Sophie herself had no idea what had been entrusted to her. Sophie had never asked for power. She had never positioned herself as an heir. She had simply done her duty quietly, faithfully, without expectation of reward. Which is why when Princess Anne finally prepared to tell her the truth, Anne knew this wasn't just a revelation, it was a burden, because the Queen Mother hadn't just given Sophie everything, she had given her responsibility that would follow her for the rest of her life. And Anne understood, with painful clarity, that once those words were spoken, Sophie's life would never again belong entirely to herself. For years, Sophie had existed within the monarchy as something rare, someone who neither resisted the institution nor tried to reshape it in her own image. She adapted, she endured, she remained steady in moments where others faltered. Her strength was never loud, never theatrical. It was quiet, consistent, reliable in ways that did not demand recognition. She fulfilled her obligations, not because they elevated her, but because she believed in service itself. That was who she had always been, and that was precisely why the Queen Mother had chosen her. Anne knew this truth would not empower Sophie immediately. It would unsettle her, because Sophie had never measured her worth through inheritance or authority. Her identity had never depended on control. It had depended on control. It had depended on contribution. And now Anne carried knowledge that would alter that identity forever. The moment before Anne spoke was heavier than any moment she could remember, not because she feared Sophie's reaction, but because she understood the emotional shift that was about to occur. This was not simply information being shared. This was destiny being transferred. Anne could feel the Queen Mother's presence within that truth, not as memory, but as intention. It was deliberate, permanent, unavoidable. When Sophie finally understood what had been entrusted to her, the conflict within her was immediate, though unspoken. This was not something she had prepared for. It was not something she had imagined. The Queen Mother's trust did not feel like a gift. It felt like responsibility carved into her future without permission. And yet, beneath the shock, there was something else, understanding. Not of the decision itself, but of the weight behind it. Because Sophie had known the Queen Mother, she had known her discipline, her foresight, her refusal, left to act without purpose. This decision had not been emotional, it had been intentional, and that made it impossible to dismiss. The psychological burden began quietly, not through fear, but through awareness. Sophie understood that inheritance did not simply elevate her, it exposed her. It would change how others saw her, how they spoke to her, how they trusted her, or how they didn't. She would become both beneficiary and symbol, trusted by one legacy, questioned by others. Isolation, Anne realized, was now inevitable. Not because Sophie would be abandoned, but because she would stand in a place no one expected her to stand. She would carry authority she never pursued. She would represent a decision she did not make, and she would be forced to navigate reactions she could not control. Yet within Sophie, something else began to emerge, not ambition, not hunger for influence, but acceptance, not immediate, not complete, but present. She did not resist the truth. She absorbed it, she allowed its weight to settle into her understanding. Because she knew the Queen Mother had never acted without conviction. Anne saw it in her. The quiet shift, the beginning of transformation not defined by power, but by responsibility. And in that moment, Anne understood that Sophie had already begun to carry the Queen Mother's legacy, not because she wanted it, but because she was strong enough to bear it. But even as Sophie absorbed the truth, Anne realized something even more unsettling. The Queen Mother had anticipated this exact moment. Hidden beneath the last layer of documents was one final envelope sealed differently from the rest. It wasn't labeled with Sophie's name. It wasn't labeled with Anne's name. It was labeled with a single instruction: open only when the truth is revealed. And when Princess Anne finally opened it, she discovered the Queen Mother's final words that confirmed this wasn't simply inheritance. It was a transfer of responsibility meant to shape the monarchy forever. And in that moment, Anne felt the full presence of a voice that had been silent for years, yet had never truly disappeared. The letter did not begin with explanation. It began with certainty. The Queen Mother wrote not as someone defending her decision, but as someone who had already accepted its consequences. Her words carried no hesitation, no apology, and no regret. She spoke of time as something she had studied carefully, something she understood better than those around her. She explained that truth, when revealed too early, becomes vulnerable. It invites interference, it invites resistance, and most dangerously, it invites distortion. That was why she had hidden her intentions, not to deceive, but to protect them until the moment they could no longer be undone. Anne read slowly, absorbing every word with a growing sense of emotional gravity. The Queen Mother described Sophie not simply as a successor, but as a guardian, not of wealth, not of titles, but of something far more fragile, the soul of the monarchy itself. She believed Sophie possessed a rare balance, a strength rooted not in ambition, but in restraint. A strength that could withstand pressure without being reshaped by it. The Queen Mother made it clear that this decision had never been about elevating Sophie above others. It had been about ensuring that what she had built would survive forces others could not yet see. There was something haunting in the Queen Mother's clarity. She had anticipated doubt. She had anticipated anger. She had anticipated anger, she had anticipated resistance, and yet she had moved forward anyway, trusting that when the truth was finally uncovered, it would be understood not as betrayal, but as protection. She wrote that legacy was not preserved through expectation, but through judgment. Rough the willingness to act not for comfort, but for survival. Anne felt an unexpected realization settle deep within her. This moment had never been accidental. She had not discovered the safe by chance. She had been guided toward it, not through instruction, but through trust. The Queen Mother had known Anne's nature. She had known Anne's loyalty to truth would one day override her loyalty to silence. And in that knowledge, she had ensured that Anne would become the one to reveal what others could not. The permanence of the decision was undeniable. There was no condition attached, no clause allowing reversal. The Queen Mother had ensured that once the truth emerged, it would stand on its own authority. It would not require defense. It would not require validation. It would simply exist, reshaping the structure of legacy in ways no one had anticipated. Not publicly, not visibly, but fundamentally, the transfer had already occurred, not in ceremony, not in proclamation, but in trust. Sophie now carried something invisible, yet unshakable, the Queen Mother's final act of belief. The emotional weight of that realization was overwhelming, not because it created uncertainty, but because it removed it. The Queen Mother had seen the future clearly enough to act without hesitation. She had accepted the isolation that came with making a decision no one else could understand at the time, and she had waited, knowing that eventually the truth would emerge exactly when it was meant to. Anne folded the letter carefully, not as an act of closure, but as an act of acceptance, because she now understood her role had never been to question the Queen Mother's judgment. Her role had been to reveal it, and with that final revelation, Princess Anne understood that the Queen Mother hadn't just protected her legacy, she had chosen who would carry it forward into an uncertain future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.